Okay, cool. I am
That's
recording.
pathetic.
Right? I am. Okay, cool. Cool. Welcome to Let's Be Frank. Today we are talking about the line of insanity or control and influence.
Yes, the circle of
The
influence.
circle of influence. So this is a concept that kind of was brought to our attention in that PsyCan workshop that we did, that Leadership Alchemy workshop. And I know for myself personally, it's something that comes up quite a lot. I don't know, I want to let you explain it. I feel like you can explain it better.
So we referenced it last week.
Yeah. Which was when we
That's
decided
when we
that's what we're going to
decided
talk
that
about.
Can you remember in what context we came across it last week?
No, and I just watched the video back like yesterday.
Yeah, but okay. So the basic premise or the concept is that we often concern ourselves with things that are completely out of our control,
Yeah,
and we let that influence our emotions, our feelings, and I suppose through that our behavior as well.
yeah,
So the typical example is the weather. We have absolutely no control over the weather, and yet we allow that to influence our mood and how
Yeah.
we feel and what we do.
or things like we mentioned last week, the taxi cutting you off, or was it not because your breakfast spot was closed?
Could be.
I think that might be
Could
why
be.
we brought it up. So things that you really allow to change your feelings and
Yeah,
so one of the things that you can control is your behavior, your response to a feeling or to something that happens to you. So I think that's where we talk about where your focus should go.
and we're generally very bad at
We're
that.
rubbish at it. I'm also very bad at not being able to control other people and how other people react to something. I want to be able to have some kind of
Yes, assume responsibility almost
Yeah.
for how other people are going to react
yeah,
to a situation, and especially when we interact with somebody,
yeah.
we want them to like us. We
The royal we.
I think it's true for most people. I
Yeah.
don't think there's anybody that
Yeah,
deliberately goes out there to piss people off.
yeah.
We want people to like us, most people anyway.
Well, it's one of Robert Cialdini's forces of influence, or what's it called? Powers of influence, whatever. It's
Yeah.
liking, the idea of wanting people to like you.
Yeah. And then we make the mistake that we want to be able to control how other people react to something we do or say.
Mm.
So even if you know you're correct, you would sometimes hold back. You wouldn't say something because you would be worried that it might either offend or upset somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, and then sometimes we tend not to say exactly what we mean because we're trying to sugarcoat it or influence how the other person's going to respond to the things that we're saying.
Oh, you know, I'm going to go to Sam Harris's lying.
Lying.
Yeah, and the importance of that.
Yeah. So that's a great reference as well. I think I listened to it in 30 minutes on the treadmill at gym, that Sam Harris lying. So if anyone else wants to listen to it, it's very easy and quite interesting and fun.
I also find it's one of those books that you should, because it's so short and an easy listen, you should listen to it more than once.
Yeah.
To fully understand the concepts about the importance of not lying.
Yeah.
Not lying to yourself and not lying to others.
Yeah. So, back to that circle of control, or circle of, what's it called? The circle of influence. That's one of the things they're the things that you can control, which are your actions and your behavior and the things you say. And then they're the things that you can influence. And then they're the things that are in most things in that other realm of things you cannot control or influence. You can only control your reaction to them, your response to them. So I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we mentioned that we often try to try to control other people's emotions and responses.
Yeah.
But it's also the opposite is also true. It's about not allowing ourselves to respond and react in the way that we want to. And you mentioned, sugarcoating and that sort of thing, because we think how we react is going to influence other people.
Yeah.
And there's a difference for me. I'm not sure whether I'm making that clear now. But the other fact is also that life is pretty random.
Yeah.
It is not something that you can plan out 100%.
Yeah.
And we just have to accept that. We have to accept that we are not in control of a lot of things.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we mustn't. We must just throw our hands up in the air and go, "Oh, this is out of my control." There's nothing I can do. I mean, we have a responsibility to try and influence certain things, and take responsibility. But we must understand that there's a lot of randomness involved.
Yeah. I think that's where one of our blueprint top line formula things comes into play a lot, and it's also part of our FitFo methodology, is the being flexible and agile, being able to roll with whatever gets thrown at you. Something might come up that you didn't expect. Actually, something will come up that you didn't expect, and you need to be able to respond and react to that.
And very often that turns out to be better than what you anticipated or what you had hoped for.
Although it might not seem like it at the time. I think that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose it also ties in with our, I think, built-in optimism.
Yeah.
I think even people who consider themselves, or that we perceive as being pessimistic, or inherently...
Or realistic.
are inherently optimists.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that comes from, but some part of the brain or whatever. But I mean, we have to be optimistic about some things, otherwise life would be pretty miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
If you listen to Jordan Peterson, he often mentions that the default of life is misery.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think so. You can think about that as a very negative comment. I don't perceive it as a very negative comment. I think if you listen to enough of what he says and how he explains it, you'll understand that it's not meant to be a negative comment. But that's a very realistic representation of what life is. But if you are able to make that distinction, or just allow yourself to think before you react about in any situation of whether this is in my control, whether this is out of my control.
Yeah.
And for me personally, closely related to that is is it my responsibility or not?
Yeah.
To try and control something. So let's say, for example, there is certain behavior that I can control.
Your own behavior, obviously.
Well, my own or even other people's behavior.
You can't control someone else's behavior. You can influence it.
I'm not so sure about that. Maybe behavior is not the correct word there. But if you think people that end up in prison, you control their behavior to a large extent.
I think you put parameters in place to influence their behavior, but I don't think you can.
So maybe prison
I don't know.
is the best example. So let's think of an example in in our work, in our office environment, I can put a mechanism in place that says nobody is allowed to use a pen and paper. So in other words, I can control that.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think people could still use a pen and paper, but there might be consequences. So you can tell them not to do it. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do it.
I think we can put. We can even. It may be a very silly example. I think you can police it to a point.
Yeah.
Where people can't use it in the office environment.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get to is even though there are certain things which you can control.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Can you make the distinction about even if I 100% believe that is the best action for everyone to stop using pen and paper? Do I have the responsibility to enforce that? So, for me, the relation between something that is so obvious, like the weather, which we have absolutely no control over, and something that we can have control over, whether we should go there and why we go there in terms of our own responses, and being able to distance yourself from what other people do and how that influences you.
Yeah. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you get to that point of understanding whether it's something you can or can't control and whether it's something you should or shouldn't control?
I don't think there's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a simple answer for that.
Or a formula.
Yeah, so I just try to be very aware in most situations about trying to make that distinction for myself. So it then becomes a decision that I make.
Yeah.
And then I have to be comfortable with the consequences of that decision.
Yeah.
So again, back to the example that we used earlier about lying.
Yeah.
You know, when you know it's for somebody else's good.
What do you think? It's for someone else's good.
Well, sometimes you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know it's for somebody else's good, but you still sugarcoat it. That affects both in that example. So I mean, the only reason why you wouldn't do it then is to save yourself from that uncomfortable, because you cannot control how somebody else reacts to it. And there's also the perception about, well, if I tell you something, you are going to react in a specific way. Which
comes back to that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, because you don't actually know how someone is going to respond.
Yeah. And we do that.
Yeah.
We make up these. So, but just being, I don't know, just being aware of that. How do you create that awareness for yourself to try and make that distinction? I think we find ourselves in more situations than we like to admit, where we sit with us in a situation where we either hold back or we behave in a certain way that is not 100% in line with how we want to live our lives, operate in a work environment, etc. Because we confuse our ability to control.
Yeah.
So I try to create that awareness for myself.
Yeah.
And what I do is I ask the question about, well, where does my responsibility start and end?
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious things, again, like the weather and the taxis, how other people operate.
ASCOM.
Yeah, traffic lights not working, that sort of thing, they should be fairly easy and simple in terms of I have absolutely no control over that.
Yeah.
And if I allow that to upset me and that sort of thing, that's my own responsibility.
Mm.
And then there are those things where, especially when it comes to personal contact with other human beings, I think about, well, am I responsible for how you live your life or decisions that you make? I mean, and we, if we had more time, we could really go into some specific examples of where, especially in a work environment, I think that would be relevant. So making that distinction between, well, where does my responsibility end? My responsibility, first and foremost, is in terms of, well, I have to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I have to make a distinction between what is my responsibility versus what is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And what I do for myself is I think of this in terms of, well, is it my responsibility to help or is my responsibility to support?
Mm.
And just by asking that question, it sometimes gives me a lot of clarity in terms of, well, I can support you,
Yeah.
but I can't help you.
Yeah.
And what is the difference? What does that mean? Helping somebody, that means that me actively being involved.
Yeah.
Supporting is, hey, I'm here if you need some advice, if you need resources, but I'm not going to help you do a specific task or accomplish a specific goal.
Yeah.
That helps me quite a bit in terms of making that distinction and drawing that line of insanity.
Yeah.
Or understanding my sphere of influence or circle of influence.
Yeah. So I think that the reason that we use that line of insanity, it's the term that we heard from the cycling guys, is because by trying to control things that are out of your control, you will go insane. That's where the insanity comes in. I mean, I can definitely see it on a small scale with myself when I do try and control things that are completely out of my control. You do start losing your mind a little bit. So yeah. I think it's about, like you say, checking yourself in every situation and what you can do and what you can't do, and what you're responsible for, and asking yourself those questions so that you don't go insane.
Or more insane than you already are.
Yeah, who says there's anything wrong with being a little bit insane? Cool. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.